Deconverted Man here, and I've got Steve Brulé.
Brulé, yes.
Yes, I got his name right. And we're going to talk about, well, a lot of things. Mostly, I guess we'll start with feminism because I've been watching you and Janice speak out about feminism, and we're going to get into why you both chosen to be anti-feminist. But I think we'll start first with the definition. I've brought up my hesitations about feminism in the past, and people go, "Oh, well, the definition is," and then they'll pull up, whoopsie, whoops, there we go. They'll be like, "Oh, look, it says in Wikipedia, it says very clearly that it's about equality," or they'll go to they'll go to dictionary.com or whatever, and they'll say, "Oh, look, see it right there. Merriam-Webster says it's a definition of feminism: belief in advocacy for political, economic, and social equality." So that's what it is. So how dare you be against it? But my thought is, just because something's defined that way doesn't mean that's what it really is. So what is feminism if it's not this?
That's your first question, right? So to me, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, well, you hit a nail in the head there. You can define a word any way you want, but really, it is the what feminism is defined by the actions of those who call themselves feminists and who are recognized particularly as feminist leaders. So if you want to know what feminism is, you look at what the leaders of feminism talk about and what they suggest is true, and that's an old idea, you shall know them by their fruit.
All right. Well, how is it that the definition is so separate from the reality, though?
Well, they want to be identified as for equality, of course. It's like a smokescreen,
It's kind of like Islam is a religion of peace.
Well, yeah. I mean, who's going to come out and say, we want extra privileges because we're better than men and we hate men? That's our movement. They're not going to come out and say that. Right. They're going to come out and do what they're doing now.
And the other sort of pushback I've gotten is, well, you're not talking about I'm talking about second or first or whatever wave, and you're talking about the YouTube feminists, and they don't count, the sort of no true Scotsman and things like this. And I'm like, well, is there really, and I've listened to both of you, and it doesn't seem like any of the waves of feminism were good.
No.
So that's right. But surely the ones that were advocating for voting rights, they were good. Like, no. That's the, wow. Okay, well, there you go. I mean, it's an in-depth explanation to all that, because there's a lot of literature and a lot of things to really dig into. And I guess that for some, just the word is enough. Like, they don't need to look any deeper into it. And so I saw something like, well, we still need feminism because Roe versus Wade got overturned. And I was like, I didn't know we needed it in the first place, but we still need it. But if we have it and it didn't stop this from being overturned, then it doesn't seem like it's very useful. So what's going on? I was very confused about that. What are your thoughts on that sort of thing? Do we need feminism?
Do we need cancer? We have it. It's among us, and we're trying to solve that problem. But feminism is a cancer on society. I think the first person I heard that from was Milo. I can't pronounce his last name.
Yiannopoulos.
Yeah. And but it's stuck in certainly in our sphere of cultural protesters because it rings true. This camera of mine is jumping all over the place. I don't know why it's doing this. It's just making these automatic changes.
But I do want to. Cool.
So I do want to touch on the vote, because you mentioned that, and the vote is important because it's one of the things that feminists always run up their flag to prove that they were they were oppressed in history. They always do run it up, and it's one of their central what they call facts of proof that men oppressed women throughout history. But if we go back to the original, which I'm calling the birth of feminism, certainly for North America, because we have to put some timeline on it. It's useful to say this is where it was born, although movements like this aren't born on a day or even in a particular year. They grow into existence, and then they have some form of presence that you can recognize as that movement. So we talk about 1848 with the Declaration of Sentiments at Seneca Falls, because it represents the first document that that women have put forward to declare their status and their movement, and they've set out their declarations in that document, and that was written in I think it was July of 1848. And the interesting thing about this pertains to the vote is that the women of that, and most of the attendees, there were about 30% men, I think, are in that range. And they were not the slightest bit concerned about the vote for women. They didn't even want to include it in the documentary sentiments. And there goes my crazy camera again. I don't know. I'm going to have to just live with being...
you'll be blue and purple, whatever it decides.
Whatever. I'm going black and white now.
Don't worry about it. We're not professionals here.
No.
I'm not, certainly. You might be, but I'm not.
All of my equipment is dying, it seems, at the same time. My camera is about 12 years old that I'm using now, 10 or 12 years old.
It's the goddess of feminism. It's against you.
Yeah, I could understand that being true. But what I was going to say, the point I wanted to make there is that the only reason that the issue of the vote was even included into the Declaration of Sentiments, there it's gone again. My God, I'm going to have to go cameraless in a moment. But the only reason that the document was even included at all into the vote was even included into the document in the first place was because a fellow named Frederick Douglass was a black man and a freed slave. He born slave and freed. He argued passionately. The only person who argued for the inclusion of the vote in the Declaration of Sentiments was a black man. And the women, and in his argument, which you can find online and it's published, he said that women, this is what he said later, but at the time he made an extended argument of why the vote should be included. And later he said that women aren't concerned about the vote and don't need the vote because they are already represented. Wow. This is never, I think this camera is going to die. But in any case, they're already represented by their husbands, fathers, and brothers. And this is, and nobody at the time challenged that argument because they knew it was true. And this is the interesting thing, and it kind of undermines the entire claim that feminism, that women were oppressed throughout history, because those women knew that their fathers, their husbands, and their brothers were fully looking out for their interests at all times. I'm just disappearing from view here. They were fully looking out for their interests at all times. So at no point were women at that period concerned about being represented in Parliament. Because imagine this, okay? Imagine that that women, a man with political influence goes down, comes home after not representing the women in his life's interests. And he goes home and he has to live in the house full of women who are cooking his food, women who are representing his social life. Do you think he is really going to go to Parliament and act against the interest of women?
Yeah,
no, he didn't.
Never going to hear the end of that, right?
No, it would be the utter collapse of society if men in positions of power did not look out for the interests of the women in their lives. It would have been the end of our society. They would have made life so miserable that nobody could get anything done or could live in the culture as it is.
So if the suffragists or earliest feminists or whatever the label is, they weren't really out for equal rights at first, and it was only because of this. Yeah, we'll go to we'll go to icons. That works. What were they after then? What was it that they were trying to get?
Well, they wanted to represent. They wanted to present themselves as victims, because that gives them the right to demand more privileges. But more importantly, it is a part of the historical battle between the sexes. There's always been tension for power within the sexes, but prior to that period of time, starting around not long after the Enlightenment in the late 16th century, 1580 or so, it started roughly. There's debate about that, but starting after that, men had made the world relatively safe. So they were starting to build comfortable cities to live in. Food was relatively easy to come by. Houses were pretty reliable. There wasn't as politics, and this is very important. Politics was no longer a blood sport. Prior to, in early history, say if you go back to Roman times and even well after Roman times, political leaders were top targets for assassination. So to seek power, official power, you put your life at risk. You stick your neck out. So I think women saw the opportunity for power without risk. And that period of time, they started to see that. And all of a sudden, they wanted that power explicitly instead of having to go, say, influence the men in their lives. That's part of it. Now, I'd encourage you to look at the video, The Birth of Feminism on Studio B, because I go into some detail on exactly that argument. There's more to it than that. For instance, men, well, I'm going to just throw it out this way. There's a bit of envy and resentment that is built in to the relationship between men and women. Both men have some envy of women, and women have some envy of men. On the thumbnail side of it, men can feel envious, and not all men to the same degree or even at all, can feel envious of women's ability to create babies and nurture them. This is a thing that men can't do, that women can do. And so there's built-in human possibility for the human feeling of envy over that. And then on the converse side, for women versus men are clearly bigger, stronger, faster, and on the high end of things, smarter than women. And there's nothing they can do about that. So this is a built-in sense of envy. And envy plays out, it's illustrated in the biblical story of Cain and Abel, where Abel is gifted or preferred or favored by God in that he is better in everything. He's better looking, he's stronger, he's faster, he's smarter than Abel. So the envy that is depicted in that story is an envy that can only be assuaged by eliminating the thing which causes, by comparison, Cain to look inferior. So the only way that Cain can stop looking inferior if this Abel doesn't exist, because by comparison, standing side by side, Cain is inferior in every way. And Cain's solution to eliminate this source of envy is to kill Abel. And in a sense, that envy is active in feminism, in feminists. It is one of the sources, I should say, in which the anger and hatred of men is finding its culturally accepted expression in feminism.
Without the movement, without feminism or what have you, would women have a say in political spheres or whatnot if they weren't married, if they were single, just on their own. They didn't have any brothers necessarily to represent them.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I don't have any brothers or father or relatives in political sphere either. So am I less represented? Well, yes, I am in a way, because in the corruption of politics, politicians favor their friends and family, as we
Right,
know.
right.
But it's not an issue of favoring men versus women. It's an issue of they favor their current relationships and the
I guess
relationships that gave them power in the first place.
the vote thing, as you said, it was advocated for somebody, somewhat outside of this, the suffragists. So it seems like that might have come about on its own, that women having to vote. I mean, there's no reason they shouldn't. That I can tell at any rate.
Well, there is actually an argument against the women's vote, but I don't want to get into that here. But there is an argument.
Yeah,
If we're
well,
going to be completely objective about it and rational, you can argue against it. You can argue against regular people having the vote as well. There's an argument against that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
this idea of the vote being an automatic, deserved right for all people of all time is not really supported by. It's not really a solid argument.
So,
But that's what we have.
yeah.
So.
Yeah. So now, well, flash forward at any rate. So we've got kind of what the history a little bit, and the mixing of other people's interests and the movement using that and saying, okay, we'll just absorb that issue and make it that will seem we'll seem more virtuous by taking that upon our under our wing, and it seems good. Oh, it's pro women, so it must be good for feminism, and that's kind of my hesitation, if you will. Is I hear again with the definition of feminism, it's about equality, and it's like, well, okay, sure, but then you go, okay, well, you want this and that, right? And fair enough, fine. We should all have access to X, Y, and Z and rights X, Y, and Z, whatever. But then it's like you don't hear about the men's problems ever in feminist circles. You don't hear how men have it rough in child custody cases or matrimony settlements or what have you. And it's like, well, because men have all this power. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, they might have a lot of power. I don't, but but then you're not truly advocating for equality. There is that really what you see as the one of the core issues.
Well, yeah, of course they're not advocating for equality. It's a hate movement. They're always advocating for more power and privilege for women. In fact, if you pick any feminist study at random, I can already tell you what the conclusion is. And it's in paraphrase in different ways in virtually the conclusion of every single feminist study. And it is that, quote, more needs to be done for women. And if it's being done for women, it's not being done by women. In other words, the implication is always that you dastardly men need to do more for us deserving women. That is always the case with feminism. And of course they don't talk about men's issues. They don't care. Feminists don't care. In fact, every time there's an issue that's come up, you hear feminists laughing about it, applauding it, saying it should be worse, So what you're saying there is just really, you can't argue against it. They're just not concerned. I don't hear you there.
Right. I got made aware of feminism quite some time ago, when sometime, I don't know when, but after I deconverted and started thinking of myself as a skeptic and an atheist, that there was this thing called atheism plus, and that kind of was like this idea of let's combine atheism with social justice and feminism, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, this is one paper of many that are about it that's out there. Um, and there's tons of stuff about atheism plus. That's just one example I happened to Google. If somebody wants more, I can always pull up more. But at any rate, um, and I went over the history, and it was basically like these conferences where the feminists were like, we want the stage time, we want this, we want that, and then of course there was all these allegations and shenanigans and sexual harassment question marks, and somebody flirted with someone in the elevator and that was inappropriate, and just it was madness, and finally it melted and kind of imploded and was the end of it. But it still exists, it's just not in conferences anymore. And it really seemed to split in a way the so-called atheist community, which you can argue whether there is or isn't one of those in the first place. It's like, yeah, I mean, we're atheists, so I guess we're. I don't know. It's weird, but so by intertwining feminism, it seems like they really just ruined the conferences that were involved with this. Is that is that typical? I mean, or is that just a blip of the radar? It's just a weird, just because they ruined our conference, maybe we weren't the right ones for the feminists to join up with. You know, it just happened to be that they took over and wanted everything to be their speaking points and their speakers, and and didn't want anything, and then it's suddenly no longer talking about atheism at all, which was weird. But surely, I mean, we got to give them a benefit of the doubt. That was just a small group of people. Some other group of feminists, they'll take over somewhere else and do much better, right? We got to give them another chance. So, do we have an example of them taking over somewhere else and doing the same thing, or is this just an isolated?
They've taken over most of the culture and are doing the same thing. Everything that cancer touches, cancer destroys, because cancer is death. And it's feminism is a hate movement. And you think I'm exaggerating, and then people hear this, they think I'm exaggerating, because at the back of your minds, we've been told all our lives how important it is for feminism to exist in order to improve the poor situation of women all over the world. That's just an absolute lie. The thing that has improved the lives of women all over the world more than anything else is men building a civilization that includes and supports and privileges women. That is what's improved the lives of women around the world more than anything else in the history of humanity. The actual arc of history is best described by men competing for the attentions of women, which means reproductive options, and then protecting and providing for those women and children that come from it. And as a result of that, as part of that, men have created political institutions, legal institutions, educational institutions, and built civilizations that are infinitely safer and more productive and better to live in than in any period of history in the past. So the arc of history, which feminists claim is characterized by men's oppression of women, is an utter, complete, cancerous lie. And only cancerous lies like that can only lead to death of whatever they touch. Now, let me give you a concrete example. Feminists entered into the university systems in 1970 or 1969, depending on what you constitute entering in. Since then, they have utterly taken over the university systems. They've created, and from there, they've trained things like ideas like gender is not based in biology, for instance, to give you an obvious big example. And they've actually infiltrated the biology departments, and they're creating feminist biology courses and feminist glaciology, of all things, courses. And then everywhere they go, they try to find examples of how what's been done now and in the past is actually discriminatory against women. That's their only conclusion, their only interest where they go. And as a result, they distract the focus from every area into the focus of let's do more for women. That's their only goal. At the expense of society, by the way.
Right. I mean, with the gender studies, I looked into that, and that's one person on YouTube actually took a course and was told he wasn't allowed to record it or anything like that, like everybody was told that. So he secretly recorded it, and I listened to what he put up, and I've read some papers, and I just go, this is utter nonsense. And of course, the grievance studies really highlighted how feminism is pretty much nonsense when it comes to the academia of it. And it seems like, again, where that requires some digging on somebody's part to go into that, and some people they don't want to do that for whatever reason, I don't know, but they don't seem to want to dig into this stuff and look at what's actually said. They just again say, well, but feminism's for women, and that's good, and women, if we're against women, then we're misogynists. Like, who's against women? I'm not against women. I like women very much, you know. So, you know, I'm for equality and for equal rights. I'm not. But their ideology of feminism, where it is what I'm against. Well, I'm against many ideologies. Uh, you know, smash the patriarchy. What do you mean? What's the patriarchy? What is that? How are you going to destroy it? What does that mean? You know, you want a matriarchy instead? How would that work? Like, we know of what Amazonian women tribe. Like, that's the only thing I can think of that ever had a woman rule. And I don't know, maybe women would run things better than men. I don't have any idea. But you know, now I've heard more and more white male. So now it's become racial on top of misandrous, which is against, you know, it's like males bad, you know, now it's white males bad. And so math has become a problem because that was invented by males and all this. And I've seen it, but somebody out there who's never bothered looking at it or looking into it might view me and say, well, you just don't get it. You're a misogynist. How would you respond to somebody like that?
Well, if you wouldn't mind popping up this comment on the board, Jay.
Yeah, I was trying to ignore all the.
Pop that out because I'll address it through this comment as well.
Yeah,
because this is very, very common.
I was
it's a very
trying
common
to.
complaint.
I was trying to wait till the end to include anything in chat, but very well. You want this?
Yeah, put it on the
Okay.
screen there. Okay.
All right.
I'm a giant misogynist. You know, indoctrinated people always say this, and because they want to shame you into silence. This is part of the feminist bag of tricks. That feminists want you to think of feminism as equal to women. So in other words, if you despise feminism, which is an ideology, feminism is nothing but a set of beliefs and a movement to which you can choose to subscribe or choose to reject. Okay? I reject it wholly because I have looked into it deeply for 10 years now with Janice Fiamengo, who's a professor of English and did her thesis on feminist literature and has spent the last 10 years with me researching these topics. Now, that's just that you don't have to place any value on that claim that I'm just saying in my background. But the point is that somebody, male or female, can choose to be a feminist, just like you can choose to join the KKK. You can choose to join the Nazis. That is a choice. Now, being a woman or being a man is not a choice, contrary to what feminists want you to believe. And they want you to believe that for nefarious reasons. But it is not a choice. You cannot choose not to be a woman. So when I criticize very strongly, as you can see, feminism, I am saying that those people, male or female, who decide to identify as feminists are joining a hate movement. If you don't want to be in a hate movement, you can say this very second, I reject that ideology, and you're no longer in a hate movement. You can't
Now,
say that with being a male or a female. And
could it?
feminists, let me just finish one more
Okay, go
point.
ahead. Sorry.
I can't even count how many times feminists, people within an ideological hate movement, will then disparage all men for being male, something you cannot change. That is the very definition of bigotry and hatred. I'll leave it at that.
Right. Now, could it be to Steelman, Jip person? Maybe he's from Denmark, or he's lived there a long time. Could it be that they have a different feminism than we do here in the United States or Canada?
We've
So,
dealt with that in a number of videos. There is no different feminism. All feminism begins, and as their core belief is that men have oppressed women throughout time by creating laws and public policy, okay, discriminatory against women, which is not what was done. All what was done throughout history was to protect and provide for women in Western culture. Now, you can come up with examples in which women were treated badly, no question about it. In almost every case where you come up with those examples, including in Islam, you will find that men under similar circumstances were treated even much worse, but nobody will say that. So, yeah, let's leave it with this. The world our culture and civilization grew up from and within was a very harsh world where people died often miserably and violently, especially if they didn't have a community to support them. Politics was a blood sport. You went into politics, you didn't have a very good chance of living to an old age if you achieved any form of power. Women didn't want those things in those days. They didn't. Okay, I'll give you another example. When I was reading some Roman history about Roman slavery, Roman male slaves worked until they were no longer useful as workers, and they were set free so that the owners didn't have to take care of them anymore, that they had to be taken care of by other slaves in their community. Okay. So in other words, it's very much like today. A man works till he's no longer useful in the workplace. Then he's sent away to take care of himself. Okay.
yeah.
With female slaves, and I'm not an advocate of slavery in any manner. Okay. Whether it be
Right.
economic slavery or any form of slavery, I'm not an advocate of that. I'm an advocate of individual rights and freedoms. Not special rights and freedoms for women versus men or one class versus another, which is the road we're heading down right now. But to complete my example of the Roman female slaves, they were often freed at 25 to 30 years old. And they often didn't have to do any backbreaking, health-destroying labor. And like now, apart from the act of childbirth, which is an act of nature, an act of God, if you will, they were not, if they were not killed by that, which was a hazardous process, as you know, in those days, if they're not killed by that, they lived a long life, longer than men. Yeah. Men's bodies were destroyed in that process. And by the way, the only reason that childbirth is safer and does not kill as many women today as it once did is from the concern that male doctors had for this problem and put their attentions to it and solved it for women without being asked. And this is a theme that comes up in almost every time you look into what men have done for women. It is on men's own initiative out of concern for the suffering of women. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, maybe we can find something that is a feminist movement that people might object vehemently to. Here's one called TERF, which is a feminist who excludes the right of transgender women from their advocacy of women's rights. So, well, I mean, you could say a lot about that. You could say they're not really feminists. You could try, of course, which is a no true Scotsman. What's going on with TERF here? Do you have any sentiments on that to share?
Well, I've never looked into the turf. I've heard of it.
Yeah.
It's never been central concern of mine. I know they have their little side wars and bickerings going on. And it seems to me it's one of those little side war bickering things that doesn't really concern me too much. I'm more concerned of the central effect of feminism on Western culture and on the relationship between men and women, particularly, and the relationships between people in society in general. I will say something about turfs, but one of the consequences of feminists' constant, persistent hatred of men is that they are robbing regular people, lots of regular people, of the ability and the will to love one another. This is one of the effects. Now, the trans exclusionary feminist thing is depending on whether you believe that transgenderism is a mental illness or a right or a valid gender expression. So that argument, you'd have to have that one up front. As far as I think the trans exclusionary feminists go, is that they are coming from, again, the same position they are always coming from, is the hatred of men. They see it as men coming in to pollute their pure movement of
Right. I mean,
feminism.
if a woman becomes a man, then certainly they, if they don't like men, then they would want to get rid of that person. But it's weird because on one side you're like, well, if you're advocating for women's rights and freedoms, then you should say, well, you have every right to become a man or transition or however you want to put that, and we're going to support you to do that. But once you're a man, of course, we'll drop you like a hot potato. But but I don't
Yeah.
know. Um,
It's just an example of the completely incoherent, mixed up nature of the whole ideology, because any ideology that builds from a root of lies and deceit and hatred is going to inevitably get as mixed up and confused as feminism is today. And I'd like to deal with this, just comment on one fellow here says, women ruining regular people. I don't know who said, I don't believe anybody said women were ruining regular people.
he's
But
often his own little ideology spinning around.
I would remind the audience
don't
here.
worry about that.
Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity to remind the audience here that that women is not the same as feminism. Feminism is an ideological movement, and we know it has nothing to do with being male or female because there are male feminists. So if you're attacking feminism, how can it possibly be a hatred or attack on women? It is not. Nobody is born a feminist. You are born a man, you are born a woman, you're not born a feminist. It is a choice, and it is an ideological choice. So it is perfectly legitimate to attack an ideological movement, especially one that is particularly hateful and dangerous and destructive.
Yeah, I certainly am in favor of analyzing arguments from every position that I can and listening to history and data and everything else. And like I said, when I looked into this, because I got interested because of Atheism Plus, and also I briefly interacted with a feminist called Dr. Christy Winters. The doctor perhaps should be in quotes in my view because her doctorate's in feminist gender study. I guess it's under philosophy, I suppose, but I don't know. But once she started saying weird things, I was like, why are you saying all that? Like, what is all this? And also another person that was very popular with atheists for a while is Steve Shives, but he came out as a feminist, and he quickly was very unhinged, and I just was like, why are you acting like this? This is weird, and has nothing to do with atheism. And so I looked into it for those reasons, because it's kind of like a very much a side thing for me until I really started listening to you and Janice talk about the history of it, what it is, and all that. Then I got a little bit deeper into it, and I was like, okay, there's some valid and sound arguments and some data here, and I'm waiting for the other side to have anything to offer. I'm not seeing nor hearing that yet. So I'm like, okay, feminists, you have the opportunity. Where's your argument? And when the few times that they've actually debated somebody, well, Sargon, I believe, Sargon of Akkad debated Christy Winters and utterly annihilated her. It was almost comical because here's somebody with a PhD, and I don't know which one of them demanded that there be citations under that video, but there were citations. Her citations included YouTube links. This is a PhD person. I
Yeah.
just and his were all like journals. So I'm like, well, you win. But that's just one example. I wanted to, and then there was this weird. Now, this one guy, of course, you're not going to be familiar with these names, but my people will be. Saitan Atheist, who did funny cartoons, and he did this one thing about Islam and feminism kind of being, they like each other. They're sort of like this weird, I don't even know what to call it, but they the feminism like was like almost pro Islam. Do you know anything about that at all? Or is this just coming out of left field for you?
I've heard tidbits of comparisons. I've never been exposed to any particularly in-depth argument about comparing to Islam. But I will say that if you want to make a comparison, East and West, I think the more accurate comparison is the Taliban. Feminism is like the Taliban, and the Taliban is a part of Islam, or it's a subset, but a very militant, and it dominates the regions in which they flourish. And feminism really is the Taliban of the West, in that it dominates everything and it terrorizes people into doing what they say.
Do you think it was the feminist movement that came up with the word of Islamophobia, or do you think that was
Islamophobia?
Islamophobia, or was that from
I don't
Islam?
know.
I don't know either. I'm
I
just
don't know
wondering.
where that came from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know if it would brush against your stuff, because you're very focused on the primary thing, where I'm kind of like, oh, these are the things I like. Okay, to get to the part that my audience is normally used to, which is faith and
Okay.
belief and all this. So, do you have a belief in any god, religion that you hold to, or anything like that?
That is a huge topic. I think it's a
It is.
topic that deserves multiple hours of discussion. But it's a topic that's very important in our day. I think
Mm,
it's actually more important than feminism. I would say that the question of God, the question of religion and beliefs, is
mm,
probably the most difficult topic that we have today. And I've done some research on this, and this is going to be the focus when I'm done with the whole cultural wars with feminism. This is going to be the focus of my next projects.
mm,
Um, but years ago, I was exposed to a fellow, Thomas Berry, who was a Passionist priest. He's dead now. But he identified our moment in history. He was a cultural historian. He kind of downplayed his role, previous life role as a priest, and he called himself a cultural historian or geologian in a sense. And he was
mm,
concerned about the broad sweep of history of humanity, and even researched into the Big Bang, cosmology. He published a book with Brian Swim, a physicist, a astrophysicist out of California. But he says that we are between stories, and stories, by the way, are what guide humanity.
mhm,
People tell themselves a story about themselves. They tell themselves a story. We tell each other stories about how the world is and how the world came to be, and that stories give meaning and purpose to human lives. We can't live effectively without a cogent story. Now, prior to the Enlightenment in the Western world, Christianity was the cosmology, and the cosmology, it gave meaning and purpose, so that it explained the suffering of a life. It explained the purpose of your actions. But the Enlightenment and the years or centuries from there undermined this story, so that it doesn't have the power of guiding power that the story of Christianity, for instance, in the West, provided. So he identifies that our biggest and most important work today is to take the scientific view of the universe and make it a cogent story of it, so that we can once again have a story within to place the context of a human life, the context of a community life, the context of a nation, of a people. And we don't have that. What we have, though, which is immensely important, this is an enormous achievement, is a new view of the universe, of where it came from, how it developed, what is the structure of matter, the structure of energy. We have all of this incredibly rich information. But those things are, at this point, I'm a scientist, by the way. I trained in chemistry and I worked in research for over 20 years. But what all of those things are maps. They're best understood. You could say models, but I like the word map, because, when you're going somewhere, you use a map to tell you how to get there. And what a scientific theory does is it's like a map that tells you how to do or get something that you need to do or get or go to. So these theories are maps, but they are not the reality. And this is the difference. The reality of the universe is still very much a mystery. And I was recently watching an interview between Roger Penrose and Jordan Peterson. Very good interview, by the way. I encourage anybody who's interested to get into that and to look into some of Roger Penrose's work. And I would say that Roger Penrose is not the person you might think he is. He's a Nobel Prize winning physicist, but he's got some insights into the nature of the universe, I think, that are particularly unique, particularly his insight into singularities. And I know this is going off into wild spaces here, but his work into singularities is very interesting in the sense of it applies to what is the nature of time, what is therefore the nature of our lives. When you talk about a singularity as the beginning of the universe, as Roger Penrose says, a singularity is the end of the universe as well, and that there's no true beginning or ending. But that's a bit apart from the point here, that ultimately, when you peer down to the nature of matter, you come down to a mystery. It is a mystery. But we do need to correlate or to assimilate the mysteries that we have today, and what do they tell us about us as a human being? And this is a mystical process. Meaning and purpose is not coming from the scientific maps that we are creating of reality, the journey, the physics, the chemistry, the biology. We're not going to get any meaning and purpose from that. We're going to have to philosophize about what that means. And in the philosophizing, we have a chance to get a glimpse of what we are as human beings. And what that is akin to, it is almost identical to the process of going to God, if you will. This idea of God and belief in deities, it is a greatly oversimplified concept, because people carry on talking about God as if there's a consensus of what they mean by the word God. And
right.
There isn't.
No, yeah.
There isn't.
That's one of the questions I ask. People bring up God. I'm like, which one are you talking about? Kind of or sort of an ichthyist in that way, that the word doesn't even really have a coherent meaning.
Doesn't have a coherent meaning. And I want to make one more point before we go off this topic. Because
this is the topic for my channel. So yeah,
because it applies to atheism.
Yeah,
there's a problem with atheism.
Yeah.
Okay. The problem with I mean, there's a problem with all religions and all philosophy. This is
Right.
philosophy we're
Yeah.
talking about here,
Yeah.
okay? When you talk about God, you're
Mhm.
really talking about philosophy. And
Yeah.
the difference between talking about God and talking about philosophy and gender is that the philosophy of God begins with the presumption that God exists, but still doesn't define what you mean by God.
Yeah.
It's another
Right.
problem. Here's the problem with atheism, though. To say that there is no God, I don't believe in God, is
Mhm.
to say that there is no conception of God that can be believed. It is a rejection of all concepts of God wholesale. Okay? How can you, a fallible human being like me or anybody, say, I have conceived of and considered every single possible conception that anybody or any being ever existed or ever will exist about this concept of God and found it to be false?
Yeah.
This is
I,
an enormously egotistical position.
yeah. I want to push back on that a bit
Sure.
because
Yeah.
this is something I've done for a long time. That the word atheist has morphed and changed, and those that call themselves atheists. And I don't see that we have leaders. Sometimes we've been accused of having leaders, and I just don't view it that way. Like I said, I don't think there's an atheist community as such, because it's like, well, what's God? And you go, well, I don't know. It's like, well, how do you not believe in it? It's the same way you don't believe in Flargo, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what's Flargo, blah, blah, blah? Exactly. Do you believe in Flargo, blah, blah, blah? Well, no, I don't, but I don't even know what it is. So I don't know what to call that. You want to call that agnostic? Do you want to call, and that's why I just said, I'm a skeptic. Forget it. Okay. How about that? There. I've solved everything. I'm skeptical of all the words, just to get out of that whole mess. But the label to me doesn't really matter that much. But from my observation with most the atheists I've dealt with is that the word atheist means to them that whatever that the most general conception of a higher being that's created the universe, that's what they are saying that they don't believe in. And as far as outright rejection, I think that only comes to particular versions of God. So for most, they're not what you would call hard atheists. They're mostly soft atheists. For Yahweh specifically, I would be a hard atheist. For other versions of God, what you got, But because I have a coherent argument against that one particular type of God, but other gods I haven't explored, and so it's difficult. But I don't believe in it, and for most things about it, I would just say I'm a skeptic. I hold in judgment whatever that is until somebody tells me what they mean by it. Then I can go, okay, yeah, sure, that's a thing I believe in. I could label Pikachu here. I could say he's God, and it's like, do you believe in God? Well, yes, I believe that that's a thing. You've named it God, so sure, God exists. And it's like, okay, well, fair enough. We're done. So, but I do understand that that the word and there's been push back and forth in philosophy and yeah but it comes to the thing of, do you personally believe in God, whatever? And then I guess for you might say, well, what do you mean by God? And I'm like, I don't know, what do you think it I don't know, how do we even start that if neither of us know? Do you think a personal a thing with a mind created the universe? Is that a thing you believe in or not? And we'll call that thing God. So
A thing with a mind created the universe.
yeah.
I've never thought in those terms. I will say one thing I was watching came to mind as you were speaking there. That kind of struck me. I was listening to a video lecture by a professor historian of historical Jesus,
Mm,
and so he was talking not about, like, this wasn't the main focus of his talk, but I thought it was interesting because he was talking about the church as before the Enlightenment period, and that before the Enlightenment period, there wasn't a fundamentalist literalist movement in the church. It didn't exist. The philosophers, none of them were literalists. Literalist fundamentalism emerged from the church as a result of the scientific inquiry into history and into the Bible. And so there was an objection amongst a faction of people as to they felt threatened by their spirituality, of their understanding of religion, God. So some of them, not all of them, diverted into a kind of literalist insistence on the literal interpretation of the Bible, which then caused all kinds of other problems, as you know.
Right.
But
the
one thing that
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
the one thing that struck out about him at the time was that now I forgot the main point I was coming to. You carry on. It'll come to me.
Sorry.
It'll come to me.
Yeah, sorry. Sometimes my ideas proceed through my mouth before I realize, I need to hang on to them. Yeah, I'm still developing my skills as an interview person.
No problem. No problem.
But yeah, with now I forgot what I was.
Well, let's get
anyways,
back to the topic
whatever.
of God.
God,
Okay.
whatever. Sure. Yeah. The nature. How.
Oh, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Here's the thing I was going to say.
Right.
Is that the whole purpose of what this is my seeing of what he was revealing in a short bit of that was that it's the religion and the pursuit of a relationship with God is about finding ways to relate to the center. Okay, the center of things, and the center being the center of the universe, the center of you. Okay, so we conceptualize, or philosophers conceptualize center, and you even have words like centering yourself. And if you've ever done those kinds of centering exercises, you feel a little different for doing them. It kind of is bringing yourself in line in some mystical, sort of hard to describe way. And that got me to thinking about the center of things. And this goes back to, let's take this back. I know this does relate to my beliefs in God, okay, believe it or not, but it might be a little long-winded.
We'll just take the long way around. That's fine.
Because I don't know of an easy, quick way to say it.
No, that's fine,
Way back when, in the Greek times, Democritus had this very simple philosophical idea that, you can take a rock and you can break it into little pieces. Okay. Then you can take another piece. You're familiar with this story, and you can break it into little pieces, and you keep doing that. And he philosophized that, well, eventually you must get down to something that won't break into pieces, the fundamental particle. Yeah. And he called it the atom. Yeah. Okay. And so the idea of the atom was born like 2,500 years ago or so, or more. Yeah. Can't remember the exact time. And it wasn't until, I think, Rutherford, which was the 19th century. I can't remember when Rutherford did his little experiments there. And they proved the existence of atoms.
Right.
Okay. So, but here's the thing. The atom then didn't survive very long as an indivisible part of the indivisible fundamental building block of matter, did it?
Yeah, no, because we got the things that made up atoms. And
then we got into that.
Yeah.
And when we jump forward to where we are today, the
Planck length and the energy is kind of the energy is essentially the smallest.
Well, there is nothing there.
Then there's like
nothing there.
Yeah, and then you go, well, what? So.
It's not. If neither is the matter infinitely divisible, it's not infinitely divisible.
Yeah.
But when you break it apart and break it apart, keep peering and peering and peering, what you find out is that there's nothing there.
Just empty space, right? So
yes, that's right.
The sum total energy of the universe is zero. So it's like, well, ultimately we're nothing. It's like, well, we're the
Well,
Red
not
King's dream.
exactly.
You
This is
know,
where
we're all a dream. You know,
this is where that is actually pretty accurate. In fact,
yeah,
Thomas Berry wrote a book called The Dream of the Earth.
yeah,
And to a great degree, that is what human beings
yeah.
are.
Or the way
We
the
are a
universe,
dream of the earth.
yeah, the universe trying to know itself is how Neil deGrasse Tyson put it, and I think that,
We
yeah,
are
it's like,
the universe looking out at itself and wondering what it
what
is.
the bleep?
And in a very real way, in a way that's meaningful, okay, and not in a scientific map making kind of way, in a way that's meaningful, we are literally the dream of the earth. Our
Yeah,
bodies have been dreamt up out of necessity by the earth, and we
yeah,
have a story. We are playing a role in that story. Now, I wanted to get to Roger Penrose, because I think the critical thing that Roger Penrose, why his work is ideas are so important, and there have been evidence for the existence of this particular idea. And he talks about the end of the universe, okay?
mhm,
And using his ideas he worked out with Stephen Hawking, that all matter, he suggests, that in the very distant universe will convert into photons. As photons are the ultimate result of evaporation of black holes, for instance. Okay. And at the end, the interesting thing about this is that photons don't experience time. So for a photon, the beginning of the universe and the end of the universe is the same. And so also not experiencing time, when all matter turns into photons at the end of the universe. Photons have a wave function, by the way. And in my view, I think those wave functions, all waves undergo constructive and destructive interference, including light waves. Ultimately, if you're given enough time and all the universe is turned into photons again, those light waves are going to be constructively interfering and destructively interfering, and they will go into some kind of a wild energy swing, which ultimately leads into the next big bang.
yeah,
And this is the kind of thing that Roger Penrose is saying. Okay, so and he found in the star tracking evidence of previous big bangs. And I'll let you go to his work for that, because I don't really understand how that
yeah.
all works out.
I'm familiar with some of it, but yeah.
But here's the other thing, okay, that I want to make, and I know this is going to come across a little bit esoteric, but
All right.
all photons are electromagnetic radiation. All electromagnetic radiation is in the form of photons. Okay, you understand that. You follow that bit. Now, your brain waves are photons. They are electromagnetic radiation radiating out of your mind every day, all the time. They are photons. What we know about photons is that photons do not experience time. They are timeless. Now they are weak, but they are there. They are a weak fingerprint of your presence at this particular time in this particular universe. And they are being emitted from. And here's another thing. Every single person's brainwave patterns are unique. So, in a sense, there you have the basis in physics of the existence of your unique presence. Call it what you will, call it a soul, call it your mind, call it a universal mind, or you're part of the universal mind. But it is there, and it is timeless, because photons do not experience time. So you have an element of infinity built into you, timelessness built into every single person. So these are very mystical ideas. And you can find, the interesting thing is that you can find these ideas expressed in different ways in different religions before anybody knew about photons. So given that what it is, I want to draw this back to the importance of a story. We need these kinds of stories or something like that. And I'm not attached to my particular expression of this idea. But we need those kinds of things for people to understand what a human being is and how to place the context of your life. Because here's an existential problem. We all die.
Yeah.
And that's a very disturbing thing to know all your life. That, I mean, we could end this interview and I could walk over to the kitchen and fall dead.
Right.
Okay. I don't really like that idea. It's hard to live with.
Yeah, it's whenever I think of mortality, I just reflect on the moments where I was unconscious that I'm aware of. And then for whatever reason, I don't count sleep, which is, I don't know, that seems weird, uh, but it's like we were doing this fainting game when we were kids and making each other faint. And one moment I was there, and then the next minute it was like I was waking up from a weird dream and I was all tingly. I'm like, what? And I'm on the floor and they're laughing and I don't know where I was. So for a moment, I was like, oh, okay, here I am. I'm back. And well, there was nothing in between. So there was no me in that moment. And, another time I got put under for minor surgery. Uh, and, there's counting backwards from 100 to whatever. And then all of a sudden I'm in the room and I'm like, okay, well, I'm really hungry. It's like nothing happened. I wasn't there. Um, so it's, that's that non anything might be what it is to be dead. Um, I'd rather be surprised to find out that's not the case, but I'm not, I'm not expecting anything, I guess would be the way I look at that. I just go, well,
Yeah.
that's what it is. I don't know. I mean, hopefully I'm wrong. Wind up, in some cool thing that I don't know, but I think that the afterlife stuff is perhaps why, well, I don't know why God got invented or the two are intertwined, because I can conceive of an afterlife without a God and a God without an afterlife. I don't think that you need to have one to have the other. I don't believe in either one. um because I just don't have the sort of same scientific evidence that I do for everything else. And I think, like what you're saying with, our the bits of our brain in a way are you could say eternal to some extent. It's like, well, that's nice, but unless I'm aware of it, it doesn't really help me. It doesn't
Yeah.
really matter. Matters to some extent that it's true, but it doesn't help me because I'm not there to know about it. I'm not there at the beginning of the universe. Or is it that, well, I'm trapped here, I'm only aware of this, and then when I'm not here, then I am aware of, I don't know. But if there's evidence of it, great. But if not, then what are you going to do? You have to doubt.
Well, you are describing very much so why the creation of a story that makes sense of meaning and purpose for humanity, why it's so important today, because of all of this kind of existential questions you're talking about. About what happens when you die. Um, you want to live in an afterlife, but is it really any evidence that there is such a thing?
Yeah.
Sure, all those things are important. I do want to say one or two things about this. Is that most of our concerns, I think even all of our concerns about dying, about afterlife, about what we think about in the world are in our lives. These are all ego questions.
Yeah.
They all exist only within the ego. And when you go to sleep, your ego goes to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you still dream.
Yeah.
There's still something going on there. And that's another part of you. And when you're awake, your consciousness is dominated by ego concerns.
Yeah.
And your ego really is mostly a lie you tell yourself.
Hmm.
Okay, you tell yourself, I am this and I am that. We all have to do that. We're born into this world and we look out at the world and we can't get the world to do what we want. And we've realized what we need to get the world to do what we want,
Yeah.
or it's miserable. And we
I
create
think
an ego.
another reason why we tend to believe in an afterlife is like we can't perceive the world without us, because I'm so amazing. How could, but the universe was fine before me, so it'll be fine again without me. And that's humbling. And
Psychologists today will say that that none of us has an accurate representation of who we really are.
hmm.
That ego is not accurate in any in any form. Not even your memories of yourself and your life is accurate. They are maintained by repetition. And like a story you tell in a circle, when that story comes back around to you the next time, it's hard to recognize it.
Yeah.
But when you're telling that story to yourself and modifying it day by day slightly, it changes. You just don't realize it's changed. So your stories you tell about your own life are not true. They are there to give you a sense of continuity, meaning, and purpose so that you can survive in the world and you have the motivation to survive. I'm going to give you a little tidbit here. This will be interesting.
Okay.
The French word for orgasm, do you know what it is?
No.
The little death. The little death. And it's interesting because in an orgasm, you forget your ego. You forget it. It doesn't go away, but it momentarily doesn't dominate you. Now your ego is now not in control. And I find that very appropriate word for that. It is a little death. So don't be afraid of dying. It might be a good experience.
I'm not planning on. Look, I'm gonna be around for a long, long time. Yeah. I'm gonna be the one that the first one to become have my brain uploaded into the internet or something. I don't know, but whatever it is they can do. I don't know. I just want a button that like there's this show called the Good Place, and they're in the afterlife, and they finally come up with the idea that they need a way to stop existing if they get bored. Otherwise, it becomes monotonous because you've done everything. Mm-hmm. So once they install that, then they have this thing they can walk through and stop existing. I'm like, okay, basically I want that, but I want it to be a button, and I want it to have a lot of passwords, because it'd be like, are you sure? Are you really, really sure? I'm like, yes, just in case, I go, no, never mind, at the last moment or something. But at any rate,
anybody can. We all have those buttons.
Yeah,
we just don't want to use them.
Yeah, right. And I don't know that we actually answered the question of if you believe in God, but maybe the question.
Well, I'm getting to that.
Yeah, you're getting to it. Maybe one day. I don't know, but yeah. Well, maybe we have to answer what you think God is first, and that's kind of, I think, what you're doing here. So.
My present thinking, I'll just try to put some words around that for now. My present thinking is that, like, I am scientifically grounded, okay? And I don't believe that we should accept anything as a literal truth, which does not have some support in science. Or let me put it the other way around. If science rules something out, then we best look elsewhere. Yeah. Because it's like an Occam's razor. Science is like an Occam's razor, if you're familiar with the term.
Yeah.
You cut out what's impossible. That's what science can do for us. Okay. We need to respect that. So that cuts out fundamentalist beliefs in a literal Bible. To me, it does.
Yeah.
Okay. But so now what else do we have in science? There's an awful lot of stuff going on. There's even talk of multiple universes. There's talk about never beginning universe, which I subscribe to Roger Penrose's view. I think is the most important work in astronomy today, or rather cosmology today. I don't think the scientific community quite appreciates the importance of that insight that he's putting out there at the end of his life. This is going to turn into a really, really important bit of cosmology. But I'm not concerned about multiple universes because we got way too much to deal with in this one universe.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Let's
deal with this one.
There could be. I'm not saying there aren't multiple universes out there. I'm just not concerned about that because I'm not going to get past. I'm not going to get to the end of the mysteries of this universe anyway.
Right.
So let's stick to this universe and what we can know about. I'm going to call it spirituality rather than God. God is such a loaded term, but I'm going to say that if I have a belief in God, it's the belief that the universe itself has an element of self-awareness bigger than me. Okay. Now, people will say things like, well, does God have to be powerful? Like, how come we can? What does God do? Well, let's just talk about time. Let's talk about gravity. Let's talk about the strong and weak nuclear forces and electromagnetism. All these things. These are, we call them laws, and we can predict them to some degree with equations, and we can say what they do. But there's a brilliant explanation of time as being an emergent property and caused by entropy. And in that theory, time can go in reverse.
Mm.
In fact, most physicists today will subscribe to that. So can you decide not to be affected by gravity?
No. Well,
Well,
everything
then,
has gravity. Yeah. Everything has gravity. Yeah.
let's say it this way then, if the universe is like I suggest that the universe has some kind of psychic presence, I think, apart from me. I think we have a psychic dimension in our minds and souls, if you will, because that was present as a possibility from the beginning in the universe. If it was not present as a potential in the universe, we would not be able to have it today. That means that the potential, at least, for instance, as the universe unfolded, gravity separated from the other forces. This is how the story goes.
Mm-hmm.
And some 100,000 years later, I think, light separated, electromagnetism separated from the weak and strong nuclear forces. And so we had light. Okay. The potential for the only thing that the universe needed to do to create light, it was already there. In a sense, the potential was there. It just had to cool enough for light to separate from the strong and weak nuclear forces. And there we have light. So light was, the conditions for light were pre-existent to light itself. You know what I'm saying? Is a property of the universe that it could cool, and in the cooling, in thermodynamics, you call it increasing entropy or whatever. In the cooling, expansion of the universe cools, and that allowed the conditions for the light energy, the force of electromagnetism, to separate from the two forces of. I might get the timing quite wrong on this, but this is the process of the Big Bang.
Right. So,
is
your argument essentially that consciousness, as we understand it, which goodness knows if we understand it, that had to exist prior in some shape, in some way, before any creature could have consciousness, that it had to already be in the universe?
I think it's clear that the potential for consciousness had to be there before us.
Okay.
It had to, look, can something exist if there's no potential for it to exist prior to its existence?
Okay, so
let's put it this way. My son exists. The potential for him to exist existed before he was conceived.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess so you're saying that you have this idea of this potential, so it's not an actual
what is
disembodied
potential?
mind, or
you're familiar with the term potential energy, right? The potential for it to exist is just waiting for it to exist. And combine that idea with the fact that photons don't experience time. And photons are the ultimate form of energy to which the universe will end. They don't experience time. So what I'm trying to suggest is that I think that the universe, but by the way, not consciousness as we define consciousness is not necessarily the only consciousness out there.
Right.
For instance, let's just use the analogy of light. When you say you go out on the street and you ask people what is light, well, they'll tell you it's a vision, but that's not what scientists call light. Light to a scientist, for instance, is electromagnetic radiation. That includes radio waves, that includes X-rays, that includes the UV, that includes the visible spectrum. The visible spectrum is this little teeny bit in the middle. It's a very small part. It's just that happens to be the parts that our eyes respond to. So we can only see the electromagnetic radiation that exists in that teeny weeny little part of the overall electromagnetic spectrum. So when I say that I think that the universe itself has a dimension, that has a property of consciousness, I'm not really holding it to the way you and I can conceive of consciousness. And for all intensive purposes, that is clearly much bigger than you and me. And so that qualifies, in a sense, to be a form of, say, a description of God.
Yeah, I guess that maybe the word choices that are somewhat limited. We're running up against the problem of natural language, where you and I don't have the vocabulary to really say what it is. I'm trying to understand what you're describing, and I'm wondering if I'm, getting it wrong in my own head, that I'm saying, okay, well, what is he talking about? It's not describing a mind as portrayed by at least Judeo-Christian religion, or many of the other religions out there. This is very much a human type of thinking that goes on in those religions. That it is a giant us. It is a big us. Is God for them, even though they try to say, "Oh, God's beyond space and time," and I just roll my eyes at that. I'm like, great, you've just defined it out of existence. This is something completely different, and I'm trying to understand if it's just a matter that you're anthropomizing the universe needlessly, or is it that the vocabulary here isn't quite right, that the word consciousness, since it's so different, maybe we need a different word, or
we could use a word like soul. Because soul is in historically in our culture and all cultures is seen as distinct from mind, or spirit. So that's a concept that might fit better into this area, but I'm leaving it open to the fact that it could even be something that we have not conceived of as of yet. For instance, I wouldn't say that make God in our image, or that we are in the image of God either. But I would say that, in my view, it's more accurate to say that I am a cell, for instance, in the body of God, and that we are cells. Of course, I can die and
right, just
God
like
continues on. I mean, I have, like, I don't know how much it is, billions of brain cells, and a lot of them can die, and I don't even know it.
And
but I'm very happy they're there.
Yeah, and yeah, right. Is this belief? I mean, would you call it a belief, or would you call it? Maybe you haven't formulated a valid and sound argument for it as yet, or laid out all the empirical evidence that you would need to convince a pesky skeptic like myself. But yeah, so would you call it a belief, or would you call it more grounded than that? Or
I would say it's my attempt to reconcile the maps that are the important maps that are available to us from the scientific enterprise of the last several hundred years, and to reconcile that with what it means to be a human being, and therefore to place a context that to create that story. Now, I'm not saying that this is the story that ultimately, there are people out there thinking about these things. They're much smarter than I, and they will come up with things I never thought of that may be like a paradigm shift in my thinking. I don't know. But I do think that this is a very important process for human beings, that we have some concept of context for our lives. And that context is best provided or built within a structure that we can rely upon. if we so that we don't go off into an utter fantasy, complete fantasy land. The ideas
Yeah,
I'm talking about right now are already hard enough to
yeah.
accept.
It's
You know,
poetry.
it,
It's you know, I think of it, and again, I'm trying to understand what you're saying as best as I can, and goodness knows if you understand me or anyone understands anybody. Half the time, you know, that 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 the poetic ideas that we have, the word spirit, soul, God, whatever, these are just filler for for something that many scientists, they've said God and they meant like Spinoza's God, right? And the religious take that and run, and I'm like, you didn't listen to what they had to say. You had your like my otherwise usually coherent person, Jip person. He's usually very coherent, but today he couldn't process what was going on at all. He was in his own, la la land, because it was challenging a belief that he has in regards to this word that, for whatever reason, he has become a god, if you will. That the word cannot be challenged. It means this, and where he, what he. I'm just looking at what he said. I was like, what? You're not even in our universe in the same conversation that we're having, and that happens with religious people too, where I see a scientist say God, and it's like, well, I know what they meant because I read the thing, and you mean this. You don't mean, when people will say like, well, almost the entire world believes in God. I'm like, no, you they believe in a word that has, they use the same word perhaps, but it's not the same belief, and so they get this black and white thinking. They're like, oh, Christian, atheist, or I'm like, no, 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 no. It's not even that. It's I need, and I keep telling them, I was like, look, I need the same sort of evidence that I have for everything else for whatever you want to say God is, and if you have that, great. If not, then and the only thing they do is give arguments, and the same arguments that have, the same old arguments, about 7 or 8 arguments that are really just remixes, and they're all invalid. And so there's a logical fallacy because they don't map to reality, because the concept of
yeah,
God that they have is not is tied to their religion. It's this concept of God that I think is clearly man-made, whereas this concept, although it is man-made because you're a man and I'm, we're humans, and human-made, perhaps we should say, and perhaps you're using the word God or soul, or as this poetic thing that's not meant to be looked at in the same way. Am I getting that? Any of that? Am I even
yeah.
close
It
to?
is.
Okay.
It's because we're dealing with the problem of determining meaning of things when
Mhm.
we leave, and it's very important. And this is something that is not done in science,
Yeah.
and can't be done in science. The whole process of science begins with by eliminating those things which cannot be measured.
Mm.
So by definition, the process of science cannot provide meaning and purpose. It can provide maps of the world we live in.
Yeah.
This is what it does.
Well,
So
I could imagine, like, if you
just
did.
to add one more thing,
Yeah.
though,
Yeah. Go ahead.
when
Sorry.
you say poetic,
Yeah.
it is a poetic. It is a poetic, and exactly in a sense, it's a mythopoetic expression of something that I think really exists.
Mm.
Okay, I'm not saying that it is mythopoetic in the sense that it's not real.
Mm.
It's mythopoetic in the sense that it's the only way that we can talk about this real thing.
Mm. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. We could talk forever about such matters, and of course humans have been, uh, and I suppose if humanity continues to be in some format, we'll continue to do so. Well, I thank you so much for your time and energy to do this. I really appreciate it. Getting, to be able to ask you some, off questions that I don't normally get to ask. Well, I consider you guys to be big YouTubers. Well, you were. Let's talk about that before we close out.
Okay,
You
sure.
had I don't know who owned it, because I don't want you and Janice. I don't know if you're a couple or you just work together, or if you want to say anything on that matter. But you
Sure.
had you had one big YouTube channel for a long time, and then that went poof, and now you're on what I believe is your channel primarily. I don't know if it matters with ownership, or if I don't know. But what happened? Explain what's
Sure.
going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I started the channel up. I went to I was doing a documentary, short documentary for a film festival back in 2012. And as part of it, I was invited to interview Warren Farrell in Toronto, which I
Hmm.
did. And then after talking with Warren Farrell, he invited us to come to see his lecture, which I did. And when I got there, there was a protest going on outside. And so I took my camera and I filmed it, and I put a video up of that protest, which became almost immediately viral. And I created the channel on Studio Brulé on Friday night at about 5 o'clock, and I uploaded that. I got that video ready and uploaded it, and by 8 or 9 o'clock at night, it was already going viral. And so and this was my introduction to YouTube, and I immediately saw the potential of YouTube, and I thought, well, this is great, man. I can self publish things and make money off it, and this is really cool. So and I was interested in the issues. So after about 3 months and a couple more videos later, I got involved with the Canadian Association for Equality, and those were the people who invited me to interview Warren Farrell in November of 2012, which ultimately led to the video going viral. Janice Fiamengo was giving a talk at the University of Toronto for the same group. So I was invited to go there and film it. And so I did.
Providence.
Yeah. And that was in March of 2013. And I met Janice there. And then I met her again at another conference. And I asked her and her husband, she's married. She wasn't married at the time, but she's married now, to come over for dinner. And we chatted. And I said to her, why don't you just write essays, anything topic you want? Because I really liked how she spoke in her presentations, and she had great ideas. I said, and I'll video it. You don't have to do anything more. I'll record it. I'll video it. I'll publish it. We'll see where it goes.
And that was the big channel that you guys had.
Yeah, Studio Brulé. It's a channel. I didn't know Janice when I started that channel.
I see.
So I met her as a result of starting that channel and publishing the Warren Farrell protest video.
Okay.
So then one thing led to the other. We called it the Fiamengo File. And then when the theme of the channel originally was to talk about things that are too hot for mainstream media, that mainstream media refuses to talk about. This was the whole idea of the channel. And that's why I got deleted and ultimately got deleted for talking about things that are prohibited topics.
They hit you for hate speech or something?
They called it misinformation.
What was the video on? Do you remember?
Well, I had several videos. I got the occasional warning, and I got up to 2 warnings in the summer of 2021, I guess, last year. And I was talking about ivermectin and the pandemic and the lockdown and some of the stuff that the World Economic Forum was doing and the World Health Organization was doing.
Right. You have to. Well, I mean, they're perfectly nothing to see here. I'm sure they've got everything under control. Yes, of course.
Exactly. So, and I was actually talking about published studies in the Journal of American Medical Society. And they demonetized
Yeah.
most of my stuff, and then they kept demonetizing until I got more 70 or 80% of my videos were demonetized. Then I got 2 strikes, and I thought, okay, I can't talk for a while. I got to let these strikes go out. And then I thought, well, I could sell memberships, and they like surely they can't complain if it's behind a membership wall. So I applied for memberships. And I, in the application for membership, they reviewed my channel in great detail and deleted it.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Did they give you an option to like download all your videos?
No.
Or is it just
boom? They send you a message that your channel has been deleted.
Even if my stance is that, look, YouTube, I get it. We have to have some mods of some sort. Fine, okay, what? But look, even if it's misinformation, I don't care. It should be out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Because it's not. It's up to us to decide. And besides, it gives me something to complain and critique. Come on, I need my content, you know? So then you're going to say, well, what else is misinformation? Is it saying Jesus came back from the dead? That's misinformation in my book because it didn't happen.
They're not concerned about all misinformation,
right.
obviously.
So
they have an
it's
agenda and a
right.
narrative.
And so I'm like, look, you can't, you know, and I've gotten hit for hate speech. And I'm like, really, guys? Who was it hating on? Like, and it was even in like private mode, so you could only see it if you had the link. And so I'm like, what are you guys kidding me? And they're like, I'm like, it's obviously a joke. It's not hating anything. Like, nope, it's dead. And then it happened recently again where they were gonna hit me with another one for hate speech, and I was like, come on, look at this. It's not hurting anybody. And they're like, well, okay, this time we won't
with
hit you with
YouTube.
this. Yeah, they're like,
oh,
okay.
they actually responded to you.
Yeah, they said, well, it wasn't that bad this time. So there's levels of hate speech, I guess.
Yeah.
And my view is hate speech is just speech you don't like. Somebody somewhere didn't like it. Oh, I'm like, come on, YouTube, come on. I wish that, you know, it's like, whatever. I love the platform, and I would love them to let it be free market of ideas, and they could still make a load of money with it, and perhaps even more money than they are, and that would be their focus rather than worrying about, you know, putting whatever their agendas is in the mix. I just, you know, because then, you know, another platform will come along and say we don't have an agenda other than freedom, and that will win eventually.
Pretty hard, like, to beat YouTube.
It's going to be real tough, because it's huge, right? So
it's a monopoly essentially, with some smaller players
I don't
biting
know,
at the heels.
Anyways, I don't know. Like, what can you do about it? Well, okay, so and I'll wrap up. I think that there is kind of a weird similarity in the atheist, anti whatever, in this case anti-feminist. We're both arguing against something that we don't agree with for whatever reason. And I think that I haven't found anything that I can find fault in the videos that you guys have done as yet. Otherwise, I would make a video about it. And on the flip side, I'm not aware of any valid and sound arguments for feminism or empirical evidence or anything for it that would make me think that it was a worthwhile ideology to subscribe to. And so I guess in a way we share that as well. So I suppose that line of reasoning I usually wrap up with is, if we don't have empirical evidence, we don't have a repeatable test, we don't have a valid and sound argument, then we should be skeptical of the conclusion of, in this case, maybe that would be feminism rather than, usually for me it's God. would that be your assessment as well? As there's no empirical evidence, repeatable test, valid and sound argument for feminism?
I think skepticism is a necessary part of all your beliefs. You should be skeptical of what you currently believe.
Yes.
Even you should be skeptical of scientifically sound experiments. You should even be skeptical of those results, because science, the nature of
That it
reality,
runs on. Yeah, it runs
the
on.
nature of reality is finally very, very, very subtly confusing at times. This has been proven over and over again in science, and big scientific theories are overturned. So, and they wouldn't be overturned if there wasn't somebody out there who thought, I'm skeptical about that. What about this experiment? And he imagines up some experiment that shows, for instance, Einstein himself thought he had an error in his theory that predicted, because his theory predicted spooky action at a distance.
Right.
And so he was embarrassed. He was he thought that was proof that he had an error in his theory. And it wasn't until, I think, the 1980s, after Einstein's death, that an experiment was done and proved spooky action at a distance was in fact a real measurable effect, in the universe. So, I mean,
who knows, right?
There's never a time to not be skeptical.
Yes, I agree.
There just isn't. So even, I just want to say one other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is off that topic, but
that's
we can go on for hours and hours
I know.
and hours on this.
Like trying to end. But we can't end. We can never end. I love it.
The only little thing I wanted to say is that before YouTube deleted my channel, I was suspicious of them, and I did link up to Odyssey and have everything automatically backed up. So everything that we did on the original YouTube channel, Studio Brulé, it's there. It never left. It's just that nobody goes looking at Odyssey. And every chance I get, I tell everybody it's Studio Brulé archive on Odyssey. If you're interested in seeing those videos again, they're still available.
Okay, good. That is good, because there's a lot of older ones but I enjoy what the new channel is doing, and I will continue to do so as long as you're able to continue to have it. So please, YouTube gods, have mercy on us. We're sorry. Thank you so much again, Steve, for your time and energy, and I'll leave it with you to say if you have a catchphrase or something you want to say for the final.
I don't really have a catchphrase. If you can support us, please do. We operate on a shoestring, and we have a documentary that we want to bring to theaters called the we don't have an official name, but let's just use a working name of the unauthorized history of feminism.
I'm sure that won't be protested against at all. All right, thank you so much. Okay, we're hitting the red button. Goodbye, everybody, and the button is